Breaking. What makes this trimmer different from all the other trimmers? Well, a few things for me. A new multifunction on-off switch can engage a travel lock, created for people who like to travel, whichever dimension that might be in. The Lawnmower 4.0 gives you the ability to turn the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. The Phoenix lights have nothing on this. And the new trimmer even allows you to customise your trim overall through additional guard lengths. You get a couple of those included inside the box with sizes 1 to 4. So if it's tall Nordics or short greys, it's all good. And looks wise, it's sleek with a two-tone matte and gloss finish. Even features a hot foil stamped black chrome Manscaped logo. Look at that. That is a nice piece of kit. You know when you take it out of the box and you just feel the weight of it and you just feel it's a quality piece of kit. That is premium right there, the 4.0. Did I mention wireless charging? The Lawnmower 4.0's new wireless charging system uses electromagnetic induction, which can help battery length last longer. If you're still trimming your face with your ball trimmer, it's time to make some changes. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code AndyUFO at manscaped.com. Remember, that's 20% off and free shipping on any products they've got on the website. Thanks, folks.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube with inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching outside of the sphere.
Roger. There's troubleshooting.
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
That UFO podcast is powered by Zencastr. Zencastr is one of the world's leading platforms for recording and hosting podcasts. Zencastr is a modern web-based solution for high-quality audio and video podcast production. With a full suite of professional tools, Zencastr allows podcasters to quickly and seamlessly record their guests remotely and produce their podcasts in studio quality. Check out the links in the show description to find out more. Support for That UFO podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who are the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offer precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped just launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. You heard that right, the Lawnmower 4.0. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer just for you listeners. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code AndyUFO at manscaped.com. That's promo code AndyUFO. If not for you, it could be for a family member, for the man in your life, or someone you just want to get an amazing gift for. Imagine shaving with a sleek, well-designed and optimised trimmer that makes shaving time your favourite time in the bathroom, all the while listening to Dan and I talk about the latest UAP news. So remember folks, get 20% off and free shipping with the code AndyUFO at manscaped.com.
This is David Marler, UFO researcher, and you're listening to That UFO podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO podcast. As always, my name is Andy, and joining me this week isn't Dan. Dan has a prior engagement. He's on Max's podcast. You'll know Max. I can't pronounce Max's surname with any level of justice, Graeme. But I've got Graeme Rendell with me from UAP Media, colleague and friend. Graeme, how are we doing?
I'm doing fine, Andy. How are you tonight?
I am very, very well. So I've got Graeme on the pod with me for your news update for the week from about the 23rd till the 27th of August, round about that. And it's Max Moskowitz. Again, I can't say names in my accent. You know who I mean. The really good-looking Dutch guy who has his podcast. Vinny, who is now part of UAP Media, appears on there quite a lot as well. So Dan's on with Max this evening, so we're letting him have the night off, and Graeme is sitting in instead. So we're getting a lot of more intelligence and brains and knowledge on this one, Graeme, aren't we?
Well, let's see, shall we?
Well, listen, Graeme, have you got any books coming out today or anything like that? Anything you want to talk about?
Funny enough, you should say that, Andy. Yeah, UFOs Before Roswell is due out imminently. The Kindle version should maybe due later tonight. So there'll be an announcement on Twitter when it's ready for people to buy it and read it. And that's the Foo Fighters book for people who aren't aware.
So that's going to be... Yeah, not the band, not Dave Grohl. So your World War II Foo Fighters, UFOs Before Roswell, and it's going to be on Amazon Kindle, and that'll be available this evening. Yep, we're recording this, and it's 7:45 UK time just now. So by the time I put this together and get it out, it'll be about 10 o'clock UK, which is 5 o'clock Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, and then wherever you are in the world, it's the time it is. So yeah, that'll be exciting. Graeme, you looking forward to getting the book finally released?
Yeah, it's a weight off my mind once it gets out there. Believe me.
Graeme will be joining me to talk through the book and some of his favourite parts as a guest on the podcast as well pretty soon. We're just letting him get all the little bits and pieces he has to out the way to get the book properly launched as well. So make sure you check that out. UFOs Before Roswell will be available on Amazon Kindle later on. So support Graeme, check out the book. He really does know his stuff, as you have heard Graeme on here before. Graeme will also be joining me at a small hall in Gill Lane in Preston for the Minicon 2021 as part of ufoidentify.co.uk, their conference that's going on in a couple of weeks. That's on Saturday, the 9th of October. Loads of you have got in touch already to tell us you're getting your tickets and you're going to come along. Phil Kinsella, Dave Hodrian, Glenn Richardson and Tony Topping are all some of the guests that will be doing various different talks and presentations. Whether you like them, some, all, you've got an interest, you'll be hearing about abductions, UFOs, grazing consciousness, psyops, remote viewing, and more. And you know what? It's cheap tickets. It's £10 for an early bird ticket, or a ticket's £15 if you buy it after the 5th of September. Come along. You get to meet myself, meet Graeme. I'm saying that like it's a competition or a prize, and that's like a really great thing to get to meet us. But it'll nice just be to talk to people face to face. It's been a weird 18 months, as everyone keeps saying. And this will be the first time we kind of get to go out there after the podcast being released and get to meet some people and hear people talk about UFOs face to face. Because again, right now, this is all in my head. This whole show, the audience and everything is just me talking into this microphone and Graeme on the other side of it as well. So Graeme, you looking forward to getting along to Preston?
I am. It'll be great to actually meet up with people for a change rather than just seeing them over a video link. It'll be odd, but it'll be very pleasant, I should think.
Yeah, really looking forward to it. So again, thanks everyone who's got in touch, and if you've went on and got your tickets already, if not, go on to ufoidentify.co.uk/minicon and you can get your tickets nice and early as well. And it'll be good to get to see some people face to face if you are there. Couple of quick guest updates as well. Warren Aegeus, he is author of Evidence of Extraterrestrials, will be my next guest on the podcast. I'm speaking to him tomorrow. That one should be out over the weekend, if not Monday at the latest. You'll probably find it's up on Patreon or Apple Early Access. That will be out on that early access as well, a couple of days early, and of course ad-free if you're part of Patreon or Apple Premium subscription services. I've then got a few other guests already confirmed. Deborah Katz, who is a remote viewer and clairvoyant, part of the IRVA. She's coming on next week now. We had to move that back a few days. Laurie Rayfelt, who was stationed at Bentwaters and Woodbridge in the late 70s, early 80s, famous, of course, for the Rendlesham Forest incident, is talking high strangeness. I'm going to have Nick Cook, who is on from the UK. Nick's a very popular author here. Chris Leto, Robert Salas, and others just waiting on confirming dates and times, as well as a few other big names who I'm just waiting in confirmation on before I announce. Anjali, who has made some headlines on the social media recently after her press conference, has also agreed very kindly to come on and discuss that and more. People have been getting in touch still and asking me what I think about it and everything, and do you know what? Right now, I'd like to speak to her first, person to person, do the interview, and then kind of see where we go from there. Some pretty bold and you know, I don't want to say crazy, but wild claims being made, and right now they are just that, but in a very interesting background, very interesting approach, and I am intrigued to talk one-on-one just to find out and dig a little bit deeper on that as well. So thanks to her for agreeing to come on, and I'll be announcing the date for that in due course as well. Lots coming up on top of that. The usual news and discussion podcasts, and the popular listener call-in should be scheduled in for I'm hoping next weekend, that'll be the first weekend in September. So email ufouapam@gmail.com to book a slot for that, and just put listener call in if you can, something like that in the subject so I can find out. Or keep an eye on social media for those slots opening up. I'll announce those in due course. If you're on the premium service, either Apple Premium or Patreon, you'll get early access to dates and times as well. But I do like to hear new voices, so please do get in touch. A few of you have done that already, and I've kept those aside for the next call-in. Phew. Graeme, let's crack on with our first piece on the news pod. We've got a few things to talk about. We're going to be delving into, obviously, Sky-Hub closing down. We're going to discuss Frank Kendall, who is the Secretary of the US Air Force's comments, and we're also going to discuss the OSD briefing card Q&A particularly as well. But the first things first, we had the Making Contact conference that was organised by Mark Sims and had a host of speakers, including Lue Elizondo, Danny Sheehan, Richard Dolan, and others appearing as well. Obviously, it's good to get past the talk of pricing and should these things be as expensive as they are when they're virtual and everything else, and just get into the actual conference. A lot happened. I've not managed to catch up with it all yet. Joe Murgia has done a great job transcribing, so I recommend people check out his video blogs and transcripts and everything themselves. But we want to talk, Graeme, about some comments Lue Elizondo made as part of his. What was your overall thoughts on what you've heard or seen from the conference yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I haven't actually sort of listened to all of it yet, and I've only really concentrated on Lue Elizondo's sort of pieces, because they seem to me to be the most interesting and most newsworthy sort of parts of the actual conference. That's just a personal sort of viewpoint, and there was a few things to pick up on. He goes into where much of the UAP interest started, and he talks about the late 1940s, obviously with Roswell, and then he basically says it started a lot of the conversation, but it was more of a difficult time because it was just after World War II, and things were changing in the world. It was like an atomic age that unlocked the secrets of the atom. That had was a revolution for mankind, for good or for bad. There was a space race going on, so there was challenges in that way. Things were constantly evolving sociologically because there was all these kind of growth periods, and generations where it just seemed to be sort of going really quickly, rather than in the past where sort of sociological changes would take sort of sometimes decades or centuries to be enacted. Things were changing every 5 minutes almost. So you had like women's rights certainly being a thing, black rights being a thing. There was changes in music tastes, fashion tastes. There was different types of war, so lower level wars like Vietnam. There was the threat of nuclear war. There was a whole load of things that people had to contend with. So upheavals in society to a degree. There was a lot going on, but then in the same token, you're going to be in the Air Force, and you've got generals hearing these things are around, but they're not ours. The Russians already went through that. He said, because the Americans were flying things over Russia in the 1960s, but they didn't know what they were. They thought they were Americans, but they couldn't do anything about them. And now that kind of role has been reversed. The Americans are now dealing with things they don't understand, or haven't got a clue how to defeat, but they're flying around all their sensitive areas. And Lou says, do they have the tech?
Graeme, let me ask. No, yeah, I just want to come in on that. So I thought that was an interesting comment, and it's one that people no doubt might have had their backs up a little bit on, generals and those in the military not understanding that this really advanced technology flying around isn't Russian. It's not an adversarial technology, let's just say that, and it's not US technology. So they sort of box that off as, we don't care because it shouldn't really be an issue. It should be ours, or it shouldn't be theirs. So they just don't deal with it. Do you understand, though, as someone who does look into these things sometimes as well from an aviation point of view, or that kind of, you can see the military point of view? Do you see why they do look at it that way?
I think there's two strands to that. I think they are desperate to know what they are, if they don't know already, because the last thing they want to do is admit an intelligence failure, because that's a potential weakness from an adversary. If they know that there's a problem with, the kind of collecting an information on something that's flying around, then that is a potential weakness that if it gets out, that knowledge, then another country can think, oh yeah, well, there's an avenue for us to start sort of spying on them. So at the very least, so you've got that's one strand. But the intelligence, the military and intelligence world have always been very loath to admit failure in a lot of things. It's just a mindset they have. So they're not going to come round to people and say, yeah, we don't know what these are. They'll in the background, they're desperately trying to work out what it is. But on the kind of public face, it's, there's nothing to see here. That's the easier way to do it. Rather than admit there's a failure, they'll just say it's not much of a problem, or there's no problem, or it's just something else, rather than actually say, we don't know what they are, we don't know what to do with them, and we can't combat them, we can't stop them doing what they're doing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one when you talk about those intelligence failures, because we've heard a few times comments from Chris Mellon and others in various different channels that this subject could be a huge intelligence failure on the levels of, if not greater than, something like 9/11, which is a very emotive subject, a very emotive experience and time for people. But it could potentially be absolutely huge. Lou mentioned, obviously, the talk was split into yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it talks about today, as in, that relatively where we're at right now. And again, he mentioned that the last 3 years, there was the release of the videos and the DoD authentication of them. There's been briefings in Congress with a lot of compelling data coming out, which I know people will be shouting, give us the data. We're not going to get that data, folks, unless it leaks, and it's one of those kind of hold tight for that happening, hopefully. Because we've still never saw anything of the classified section of that UAP task force report yet. And I say yet with my fingers crossed. We've got elected officials championing the cause, presidents admitting to being briefed about UFOs. That's something we've kind of heard in the past, but it's always nice to hear that and reaffirmed. And even, Graeme, something I always enjoyed, and it seems to have calmed down a lot since then, because so much again is happening, and right now Afghanistan's dominating the news, quite rightly so, from a global point of view, that we were having press briefings in the White House where journalists were finally asking about UFOs and UAPs, some of them caveating their questions with, I can't believe I'm asking about this, but... And it's just, I think, a natural thing that we got to the top of that news cycle and the peak of that news cycle, and the report was about to come out, and it came out, and it kind of died off a little bit. And I think that right now we have no chance, given what's going on with COVID in Afghanistan, particularly in any international news cycle, to hear much, if at all, about UFOs or UAPs. But I think the next time we do have a chance to see that come back into the thinking of reporters will be, like Lou mentions, when that 90-day report comes out and that update to the Senate and Congress and those who'll be involved in that. Do you think we're going to hear much more when we do get that update?
I think that update is going to be classified, personally. I haven't seen anything that says there's going to be a public element to it, but we never know. They may bring something out just to forestall any kind of media or public inquiries into what is in this intermediary, the 90-day report. In terms of the news cycle, there's so many competing things. You talk about Afghanistan, but you've still got COVID, and there are, climate change. There's still, inequality kind of issues around the world. There's a whole load of things which are competing for news, spots on news programs and the top spot, etc. So it's a very, very crowded kind of marketplace to shoehorn information about UAPs into. So I think, the information that we got up to the end of June was amazing. How much it actually permeated the average news cycle. It was like I can't even remember a time like that in my life when that was the case. But you're right. After the preliminary report, it all just died away. But then again, we haven't had any sort of drip feed of real kind of information we can get our teeth into, like we did on the run-up to that. We've had some things, little bits and pieces, but they've not been on the scale of when we had on the run-up to that report. So unless that kicks off again, And people keep saying Jeremy Corbell, has information still locked away, which he, for whatever reason, he can't get out there. Well, that might be the case, but maybe this is the time when he should start releasing some of it if he can. But there might be reasons why he can't, of course. But you would like to think there's some other people out there might be able to release some bits and pieces which just move us along a bit more as well and get us talking about it and get the news talking about it, rather than what it seems, at least just using Twitter as a small kind of a snapshot of what's happening. Everybody just seems to be at each other's throats at the moment, rather than concentrating on what we're all campaigning towards, if you like.
Yeah, there's been a bit of a vacuum or void of major news or leaks of videos, and it has caused that. You're right, that there's people just grasping for straws or trying to create news themselves, and it's one of those you just have to sit back and kind of let them go on with it, and it's just kind of filtering through the static to get to the good stuff, because there are bits of news out there, and some of those we're going to touch on within this news report itself. Lou then mentioned that really, more importantly, and by the way, if you haven't looked at this yourself or followed Joe Morgio's updates, then you can even go to Reddit, and there is a huge thread on just Lou's notes from the comments, and that's what we're using as well for notes for this, so I recommend people at least go and check that out as well. I'll put the link in the description for this show, reminding myself to do that mentally, and hopefully I do. If I don't, just nudge me on some kind of platform and tell me, Andy, you've not put that link in, and I'll get it sorted. But he mentioned tomorrow is the most important thing as we look at this, and talks about how we have evolved more in 200 years than since the beginning of mankind. And that's an incredible way to look at it. But as we have discussed on the podcast many times with different guests, if you thought of an iPhone 100 or 200 years ago, it would be pure magic, whereas now it's just science and technology. It's just advancement in technology. And at one point, what is magic now becomes reality and a practical application. It blows your mind what we have, and some of the technology we're going to have in 50 years' time will no doubt be mind-blowing and mind-expanding again. And that's what Lou's trying to get the point across there. How much more another species, if 400 years ahead of us, or 1 million or 10 million or 1 billion, if there's been that much time for something to advance, what would it look like? Would it be technological, spiritual? Would it be conscious-based? And he said, we can all agree that if there is something out there ahead of us, even by 100 years, we might not even recognise it. And I really like that he says, we talk to cats and dogs and invest emotions with them. There's an emotional relationship. But is it human? We don't know, but we assign anthropomorphic characteristics anyway. We assign qualities to these things that might not come from here at all. And he's talking about, aliens or ET or UAPs, whatever they may be. And again, I've mentioned this before, that everyone boxes it off. But why would they be a threat? Or why do they do this? And it's like, the why might not even be something we can answer, Graeme. That's just the case, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everybody does assume human characteristics to animals. You hear people talking to their dogs and their cats as though they're part, that they're a brother or a sister. And the same goes with when we assign sort of motive and agenda to possible ET. And it's weird because you see on science fiction, Star Trek used to have a kind of common trope where they would occasionally come across life forms which had basically evolved beyond a corporeal form, so that they're taken just like pure energy, if you like. And that could be something where a species evolves to. So it might not, as I say, it might not even recognize it, because it might be invisible. It could be just a force. It could be energy. It could be anything like that, which you can't actually touch or you can't see. And how do you then assign a kind of human kind of label on that? It's something that we can't even comprehend, never mind understand. So for us, trying to put a label on it just seems a bit daft, really. But that's the way we operate. Humanity's done that since time immemorial. We've always put our own stamp on animals, on other societies. So why don't we? Doing it to aliens is no different than what we've done to other people and other animals on this planet. So I'm not surprised in the least. It's how we're programmed. But I think we're going to come across something at some stage which we're going to not have a clue about. And of course, in other science fiction, you see that as well, where they just humans come across other races or other species or other life forms which don't even look like what we might think, that they're completely different. And that's the best science fiction, because it makes you think. It's not just thinking it's some bug-eyed monster, or it's a Nordic, or it's a grey. It's likely, just as much likely, to be something completely different and completely outside our capability to understand.
Absolutely. Again, it's always good to hear Lue talk, and especially in these settings, he always adds a little something. And I know there are people who always want to hear Lue come out and say exactly what he knows and everything else, but you've got to bide your time. And again, personally, I think he does a really good job, and he's always worth hearing in any sort of setting. So, and remember, Lue even caveated this appearance by saying he took no money for appearing, and you can go and listen to 100 Lue Elizondo interviews now on various different platforms and get a really good background. So Lue still has a lot of work and a lot of input to bring to this subject. And I think this is probably a good summary of where he thinks we are at currently, and things will be moving forward still. As he said, the train has left the station and it's not going back now. So yeah, let's move on to some sad news, to be honest, because Skyhub is closing down its US operations. I'm going to read out a statement from Chris Cogswell on that. He said, "Unfortunately, Skyhub will be shutting down as a managed project in the next few weeks. Initially, the goal was to create a project which can live on past the existence of the internal working group, and we believe we have achieved that. However, we do not feel it is fair to prolong this decision any further, especially given each of you our strong support, or each of your strong support in the team. This comes about due to many different issues, including COVID, changes in personnel on the project, and changes to the time available for each of the core team members. We simply don't believe we can continue as we have in good faith." So it does go on to talk a little bit more and basically say that the Discord chat for people who have utilised Skyhubs will still be open. The software is going to remain open source and open platform, so anyone can pick it up and anyone can still make tweaks and make it better and use it going forward. And that there is still going to be some form of European team that Richard will be kind of keeping going forward with that as well. So we're still waiting on some more information coming out on top of that. It was good of Chris to give everyone that statement. Steve McDaniel, who I interviewed way back for the podcast in its earlier days, was one of those members. He resigned back in March, largely due to the issues mentioned there, that, his own personal circumstances changed, jobs changed, people went back to work after COVID started kind of waning, and obviously we know we're kind of going back up and down depending where you live in the world. Be safe, everyone. But people's time just got a little bit less, so he had to leave as well. But he is working on a smaller scale project that he hopes will be more accessible to people as well, and we await kind of further information about that. But Graeme, sad to see Skyhub kind of go the way it did, because it's a really good idea, but it is something that I think still has a place in one guise or another. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. Yeah, it's an amazing concept for people to have thought about, putting that into practice. So people could just, download the software, get the bits and pieces, build their own monitoring system, if you like, to look for UAP and record information. It's a wonderful concept. I think. I suppose you could maybe argue that there was a bit of overreach here, that they were expecting maybe too much from people who didn't have a lot of money, and it was only open to people who had, like, say, $600 minimum to spend, £450 or so to spend for the basic level kit. I know they were talking about, well, you could just pick it up bit by bit, but to me that part of the concept sounded a bit like those Partwork magazines where you can build like a model sailing ship, and you get the first installments at like £2.99.
I was going to just say that. Yeah.
So then you get a couple of parts, and then the next like 3 or 4 issues are the same price, £2.99, and you build like probably the keel of the sailing ship, but then you have to realise there's another 156 parts that you've got to then pay about £7 each for, and you get one bit of the ship for each one. So to me, it all seemed a bit like that you were going to spend a hell of a lot of money, but until you'd spent it all, you weren't going to see anything that you could actually use in any meaningful way. And for people like me who don't have a huge amount of money to rub together, it was just beyond me. Even the basic level, I'm afraid, was, I couldn't justify spending that amount of money in one go to build something, nor could I really afford the investment week after week to pay for it either, or just, month after month. And I think if you were doing it in installments, it was going to take an incredibly long time. Most of the time, it would probably just sit on a shelf somewhere and gather dust. And then your motivation might go, or something else might be released in the meantime, which was better, cheaper, faster to put up. So, like I say, I think the original concept was great, but obviously the things you described there in the statement, about the fact that it was time conscious, it was labor conscious, but they were using it all up when COVID was on and people weren't doing anything. But then when people go back to their normal lives, that free time, goes, and therefore they can't spend as much time as they want to on it, and it just falls by the wayside. So it's a shame. The only good thing about it is that it seems to be being picked up by somewhere in Europe, and they're carrying on the brand, if you like, and there'll be some information that's available for people who have invested in it to run with it and maybe tweak it as well. So hopefully it'll come out in some other form in the future. But I think if anybody's going to do this in future, it needs to be a little bit more affordable, and it needs to be something that if you're going to get in parts, you need to be able to do it quicker and cheaper, because otherwise it's going to be still beyond people and beyond their motivation and beyond what they can grasp in one go.
Yeah, Avi Loeb mentioned as part of the Galileo project at Skyhub, and I think that would be as an organisation that now has some funding, and also that are going out for public funding, a good way to invest small chunks and get people on board, especially people who may already have Skyhubs. Is there a way Galileo could utilise those existing Skyhubs? That seems to be a good foundation for a software and a platform already out there that, again, they could maybe use as part of Project Galileo and say to people, again, maybe more science or people with that kind of money to invest, and depending on locations, they would even help fund putting one of these together if there were certain locations that they really felt would benefit from having this Skyhub, rather than, is it a benefit for, again, talking about the Galileo project, of me, Andy, having a Skyhub on my house for them? Probably not. It would just be pure luck or random. But are there certain locations that maybe they do want to focus on? And it's a case of they would reach out to organisations or people within that vicinity and offer to fund or part fund a Skyhub. And, it would just be a case of you would be like looking after it for them because the location's somewhere they like. Who knows? But that's just a little bit of news on Skyhub. But we will keep you up to date as more comes out with that in the future as well. But they've done some good work, and I think they've laid a foundation there for the future. Moving on, the next one was Frank Kendall, who was Secretary of the US Air Force, made some comments that were particularly interesting online. Quite a few people picked up on these. I've got the statement here to read first. I've given a great deal of thought to defending American airspace, but not against UFOs. If asked to do that, then we will do it. This is a thing that's been around for a great many years. I know a lot of people who take it very seriously, and I think we should take the phenomenon seriously and try to investigate it. I don't consider it an imminent threat to the United States or the human race, these phenomena occurring. But they obviously tweak a lot of people's curiosity and encourage speculation. So if we're asked to take that on, we will. I would have to see evidence that it was something worthy of the attention of the Air Force as a threat. Our job is to protect against threats. I have a lot of known threats out there that we're working very hard to protect the US against. I'd like to focus on those. So that's Frank Kendall, Secretary of the US Air Force. I get from his point of view that he's looking at, again, we always use the same generalizations, don't we? But Russia and China have drones infiltrating US airspace, and no doubt the US have the same in those countries as well, and potentially other foreign adversarial technology. And they want to focus on what they can deal with, not the rumours or murmurings or videos that are these objects that they can't really do anything about, but these objects don't really do anything to them, it seems, either. So it's more of an observational experience or entity than a threat. So what are your thoughts on someone like Frank Kendall coming out with those comments, Graeme?
It's a bit contradictory, isn't it? You see, if you look at the statement as a whole, the first bit sounds great. It almost like, yes, we'll start investigating UFOs and we're going to take it really seriously. Then you get about halfway down, and then he starts backtracking a bit. So it's, but we'll have to see evidence that there's actually something here. Otherwise, we're not going to, if it's not a threat, then we're not really going to look at it because actually that's our job. We look at, we look for threats, and I'm going to focus on them. So in one hand, he's saying, yes, UFOs, if we're asked to have a look at them, then we'll obviously investigate it because we should take it seriously because a lot of the American public take it seriously. And then on the other hand, he's saying, we've got all these other things we really need to concentrate on that actually they're more important. And I want to sort of stick to them. So, yeah, anybody can really take anything they like from that statement. So people who are interested in the government or the Air Force investigating UFOs will take the bits that say, oh, the new Secretary of the US Air Force has said, yes, we'll investigate them. If the people who are saying, look, there's nothing to UAP, or they're just drones, etc., or the Chinese are Russian, will say, yeah, but really he wants to focus on the things that he knows about rather than UAP UFOs. So there's a bit for everybody there. But actually, at the end of the day, there doesn't really seem to be anything new. I don't know what you think, but I can't see anything that definitely says we're going to do this, we're going to do that. There's a lot of words, but he contradicts himself. So who knows?
I'm with you on that. I do like the fact we've got someone representing the Air Force who's giving a statement that isn't just a dismissal of the subject or the potential of the subject, and it leaves the door open, I think, for the US Air Force to get more involved. I know it's very much been the Navy that's taken the lead on that subject. And the Air Force, for many different reasons and conspiracy theories and everything in between, has always seemed to keep it at arm's length. However, maybe it's an invite or an open door to let's focus on what we have to focus on, but, maybe we should investigate it. And if that means that a permanent UAP task force is put in place that is going to investigate this on a full-time permanent basis, then maybe they get more cooperation from the Air Force down the line. And that would be a good takeaway, because what people have expected is everything to change overnight. And I'll go back to some of Lue's comments in the Making Contact conference. He talks about that things are changing, but people have to be patient because there are processes and people that are dealing with these changes within government. Because, and if I just use a very, very small example, just even think of outside the government, those journalists who have never had an interest in this subject, who don't talk about UFOs in any serious way, having to turn up at a White House press briefing and ask seriously, essentially, about UFOs, and they couldn't believe they were doing it. That's probably going on at all kinds of levels now within the halls of government in various different countries. But, we're talking about the US mainly here, where they're looking, going, do you know what? We do have to talk about UFOs, and I imagine you get the flying saucers and aliens and little green men, and you'll get more and more people like your senators and congressmen and congresswomen coming out and going, well, do you know what? Actually, I was in a briefing and such. Actually, I spoke to this gent or this, this lady, or I spoke to whoever, and they seem to think there's something to it. And it's just little bits at a time, I think, that are going to get more and more involved at all kinds of levels. And I think that's what Lue Elizondo is getting at, that things will change, but it's going to take time. And that's where we just sort of have to keep banging the drum as much as we can. And it's just making sure that people don't get too high or too low when we're waiting on different announcements. And I think, Graeme, it was really important you mentioned that the upcoming update report, there's nothing to say that's going to be released to the public as far as I've seen, and it very much is likely to be classified, but we could only hope that we get some sort of statement or update from the back of that.
Yeah, that's true. Obviously, they're talking about having extra information in the report, the things that haven't been included in the last 90 days. So they might even go further back once it gets going, once it gets these rolling 90-day reports. I mean, you were saying before about maybe breaking through that kind of stigma, that obstacle about getting people talking in the media about, yes, it actually is all right to start asking questions of politicians about UAP. But also you've got to think inside the Air Force itself, sounds like they've had this culture over the last 75 odd years of just denying there's a problem, and the front-facing, the public-facing side of the Air Force have just said, look, there's nothing to see here, move on. They even set up Blue Book basically just as a sop for the public, for them to send reports in and say, look, yeah, it's just Venus or swamp gas, all that, those kind of things. So you've got that obstacle to get across as well. And yes, okay, it's all right for the Secretary of the US Air Force, the new one, to say, we'd like to investigate it. But I bet in his organization, the US Air Force, there are a lot of people who would be very resistant to anything like this happening, because there'll be a culture that's built up over the years. It's not just stigma, it's just a culture of saying there's nothing to see here, move on. And that's the big battle that will probably be happening in the next few years inside the US Air Force before any meaningful dialogue with outside agencies, the UAP task force being one, or whatever it turns into. And I'm sure that'll be something that rumbles on over the next months and possibly years.
And I wonder if some of it is going to be the US Air Force having to kind of swallow its pride a little bit, even from an internal point of view, where it's always been the Air Force and the Navy. You kind of see that as a kind of back and forward between those two kind of giants within the US military. But now you have the Space Force, who right now seems to be the stepchild of the US military, that isn't popular, the second cousin. But we all keep hearing how space is that next frontier that wars are unfortunately going to be fought over, and there's already a space race again for getting satellites up there in different space stations and bases on the moon, and not even talking about UFOs and ETs, but that's probably something the Air Force is going to be looking at. Do you know what? We now have an even smaller area that we're in charge of, where it used to be everything. They were seen as, the be-all and end-all, and I know some Navy folk out there might disagree with that, but the Air Force always seemed to be the kind of the one in charge. Whereas now you're going to have, and especially if, let's go back to UAPs, if these things are in the water, and then they come out the water and then they're in the air, and then they go from there up to space, then it's sort of going to be all their problem. And at some point, they're all going to have to come together and talk about that and deal with it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. They've got a diminishing cake, a diminishing amount of responsibility, the Air Force, and that'll be another threat that they'll be seeing as a perceived slight towards them. And especially if the UAPs are hooked onto this kind of thing, and we're saying, well, they're going to investigate it now. We're going to take it away from you, because presumably that's what they are still doing. So yeah, there'll be a bit of rancor to do with that. The other agency which you don't really hear much about in terms of you mentioned about the US Navy, the Space Force and Air Force. There's also the US Army, because they have an aviation element as well. They operate helicopters. They do have some fixed-wing aircraft, and nobody really knows what they see in terms of UAP either. They don't seem to get a look in. So I wonder if it's worth actually trying to investigate, what they see and what they report.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's one to keep an eye on, and hopefully the Air Force can get a little bit more involved, because they must have some fascinating stuff classified in the vaults back there. And speaking of vaults, our friend John Greenwald over at the Black Vault has managed to unearth a little gem from the UAP report to Congress. Executive summary back from May 17th, 2021. So in the build-up to the report being released in June, there was an OSD, which is the Office of the Secretary of Defence, Public Affairs briefing card sent out, and it talks about UFO or UAP interest remains high with the public, and some talking points and top-line messages that were given out to basically keep on line with the discussion. And here's some of the points you should hit if you're being asked about it from that point of view. Top-line messages and talking points were: we are aware of the report requirement, and the UAP task force team is actively working with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence on the report. And from there, you will see a bit of a theme where not a whole lot more gets answered. Graeme does it. It's we take reports of incursions into our airspace by any aircraft identified or unidentified very seriously. Safety and security are of paramount concern. And there's a little Q&A section, which is typically vague. But it's still a nice one to read. So, question: has the department found any evidence of extraterrestrial technology? Answer: the examinations into incursions by UAPs are still ongoing. The department does not comment on intelligence matters. If you want to be very generous, you can look at that and go, wow, they've not said no. they were never going to say yes or no anyway, because potentially the people looking into this, for example, the Tic Tacs, maybe they don't know who or what is inside of them, if anyone. So when you say extraterrestrial, they might not be, but it doesn't mean they're human, as we're probably looking at is the case. So again, from there, question, do you have any comment on the remarks made by John Ratcliffe to Fox News about the forthcoming report? The answer is, as he was the former DNI and ODNI has the lead on the UAP report, I refer you to the office of the director. And such. Yeah, so it's just a nice little find to see that stuff was given out. And I just love reading through this stuff to see official government documentation in any form reference UAPs, extraterrestrial, just having that word on there. And I think people should remember in the build up to the report coming out, I always thought, I doubt we're going to see the word extraterrestrial, but it's just nice to see it within this kind of additional information as well, and to see that it was something they were aware was going to come up in the talking points as well. Graeme, just to round off, what are you sort of expecting in the coming weeks with these updates to come out? And let's even give it a generous time frame as we're kind of getting into the last quarter of the year. Are we going to get any more videos or big news drops before Christmas, do you think?
Oh, well, if I could tell you that, I'll be just picking lottery numbers instead, I'm afraid. It's one of those insurmountable kind of questions. You just don't know what's going to come out there. We were surprised back in December 2017. Those came out of the blue. So for anybody to really try and predict what's going to come out over the next, 2 or 3 months, whatever, it's you're on hiding to nothing. Would like to think there would be, but whether anything comes out of the next, the next report, the 90-day report, is anybody's guess. They've said it's a classified report that's going to go through, but whether anything leaks out or whether there's anything that actually does appear, bolted onto that, which they can release, who knows? But again, it comes down to what Jeremy Corbell and other people have, hidden away, what they're working on, what they're talking to people about, whether they can get permission to release it for whatever reason. So really, I'm afraid I just can't answer that question, Andy. We just simply don't know. I haven't even really heard of anything, whispers of anything either. So at the moment, it sounds like nothing. But, that could change overnight. We could literally have Jeremy Corbell coming out with his high noon sort of announcement tomorrow, so who knows? I mean, just going back to this briefing card, to me, it was interesting because you could tell they keep tabs on the media because they mention at the start in the executive summary about the various spots that people like John Ratcliffe have had and the 60 Minutes segment. That they're keeping tabs on everything that's going out there. They would be derelict in their duty if they weren't. But also the fact that you mentioned before, there was a question about extraterrestrial technology, and they actually don't answer the question. They mention other things, but they don't answer the question at all. But the thing that made me laugh was there was just obviously the redacted bits about who it was prepared by, and I could have almost, for the fact it says Navy, I could have also saw Susan Goth's name written there as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if she had a hand in that.
No, definitely not. And do you know what? Just again to finish off, I am actually quietly optimistic, and people listening to this for a long time probably know I try to remain optimistic, that given it is so quiet, this for me is the time where hopefully the people that are on our side on this are in the background working on something that we're going to get. I think we're more likely now to get a really good new video without a Jeremy Corbell hyping up announcements coming in the background, that we might get something a little bit better than we've had for the last little while. So fingers crossed, folks. But that is pretty much it for your news roundup for this week. I'd like to thank you, Graeme, for joining me.
Thanks, Andy, for the invite.
And Graeme, just once again, what was the name of the book and how can people get a hold of it virtually or on ebook form by this evening? Okay, so it should be out later tonight on Amazon as an ebook. It's called UFOs Before Roswell, Foo Fighters in European Foo Fighters, 1940 to 1944. So that's the full title. But if you just search for my name, Graeme Rendell, on Amazon, you should be able to find it. And it should be available very shortly. It's just going through the review process on Amazon at the moment. Awesome, that's great, and that's good to hear. And Graeme really does his work and put the effort into these as well, so I look forward to reading that myself. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/thatUFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditated Gamma State full-on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what it is because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think may be, then against you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class with you that sonic boom? Got sleep around 6 and got wheels in my room.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer.